Hi folks, welcome to Friday's Norrie's No Wearing a Hat Day. I've just not got one line about, sorry.
Nonsense, you just want to get as much mileage as possible with that flash new haircut of yours.
Is that, well, maybe. Some interesting stuff today, no press conference. And I think we should rechristen the press conference. I was thinking about this yesterday. We should start calling it the information dissemination.
Information dissemination. You're going poetic.
Well, I thought
alliteration.
It really is about pushing information out there, and it works on that level for me. There's not a lot of politics unless it's from the questioners.
Yeah, according to Cummings and co, you need a third syllable. Information. Well, this is information dissemination. Well, that's 4 syllables, but I think you need another word to make it.
I'll think about it.
Poppy.
So due to the lack of a presser, we're kind of stuck with the papers and the telly. Ian Murray has been all over the papers. That's worth a chat. Newsnight last night was interesting. We had Curtice, Phillipa and Jamie Green on. George Kerevan's written a good piece for Bella. Was that in Bella? Yeah.
Aye.
Aye. And there's some chat now coming up on Business for Scotland about what an independent Scotland would look like. We'll maybe have a stab at that. And I've no doubt there'll be various other articles. There's a 10-minute piece running on Sky News at the moment that's worth a look, if only to understand the difficulty journalists south of the border have with telling the difference between facts and spin. It involves Northern Ireland, Wales and Scotland, but we would recommend people have a look at that if they get the chance. But let's start with Ian Murray. Jimmy.
Yeah, aye, interesting. I think there's a book out at the moment on various machinations within the Labour Party, and maybe one of the reasons why this has come to the fore. But Ian Murray apparently, well, it's not apparently, he's admitted it, he was just about to jump ship when Luciana Berger and Chuka Amuna et al. Disappeared to set up the independent Labour group and then quickly became Change UK. Apparently Mr. Murray changed his mind at the last minute. So it's popped into a few papers today, and interesting to see what I consider to be possibly Scotland's leading unionist. Certainly one of Scotland's loudest unionist voices anyway, being such a turncoat weasel that he was willing to lead his pals all the way up the garden path and then drop them right in at the very last minute. Charge on, Ian, you little turncoat.
He would have been one of the faces with Chuka of that group because he's got a big mouth. Stuart, your thoughts on this?
I've got an exclusive, according to Hannah Roger. That usually means that, which is in the Herald, that usually means that Ian Murray must have phoned up Hannah Roger. So, to defend himself, he told the Herald, all my life I've fought for a Labour government, as I passionately believe. He despaired in their consciences over that period up until that election. Very good reason. I'm dedicated to my constituents. I helped start the fight back under Keir Starmer. And, you know.
We should mention that he's Shadow Scottish Secretary as well.
He's the only Labour MP in Scotland.
I kind of, well, he resigned under Corbyn from the same position, didn't he? I think, well, there's maybe 3 things worth mentioning. The first one is that group eventually basically joined the Liberal Democrats.
None of them won their seats, by the way.
None of them at all.
No, they were sitting MPs and none of them won their
under any guise, either as independents or members of the Liberal Party, Liberal Democrat Party. The second point I think's worth cogitating about is, why has this come into the papers now? why has it taken so long to become public knowledge? And I think maybe some of the left in the Scottish Labour Party could be responsible for this, trying to make sure that Ian Murray doesn't become the next leader of the Scottish Labour Party. It's the only reason I can see for delay and for it coming out now.
Were you suggesting the fight inside the Scottish Labour Party for the leadership?
I'm pretty confident in guaranteeing there's a fight. Whether this is part of the fight or not, I'm not sure. But it just
you're right. I think you're right, Norrie. Aye.
It seems a bit strange that at this late in the day it's popped into.
Well, obviously, it was common knowledge at the time that it wasn't like hidden. It's just somebody's dug it out, and it obviously is an enemy of Ian Murray.
Well, the third kind of point I'd like to make quickly is Ian Murray's a bit of a standalone. I mean, not only is the only MP in the Labour Party in Scotland, but he's kind of weird. He's not really fish nor fowl. I mean, his constituency is both, you know, working class and upper and middle class, both, all three. And he seems to be quite popular. He's well thought of as an MP. I mean, I know a lot of us have no time for him, but as a working MP, he is well thought of.
Well, Norrie, if those are his chosen friends, it marks out quite how far to the right of the Labour Party he is. You only have to look at where some of these people have ended up since. You know what I mean? Some of the jobs that they've got, off the top of my head, I seen a list yesterday. And interesting that list appeared on Twitter when this story was just obviously bubbling under. But one of them is now a top lobbyist for the gambling industry. Another one is a top lobbyist for a Zionist organisation. So they're extreme right in terms of Labour MPs. So if that's Ian's bedfellows, then you're right. The left wing in Scotland are making sure he never gets close to leading the Labour Party in Scotland.
I think, I mean, we should remember as well, the reason for the split from the Labour Party was all about the anti-Israel lobby, wasn't it? It was all about anti-Semitism.
Well, if we're talking about Ian Murray, we're forgetting, did you see that post from the Stirling University Labour Party? Picture of a gun, a machine gun, and they've got to get, it was Save Leonard, wasn't it?
Aye.
I would imagine Stirling would be quite left.
The suggestion was that the guy who posted it made a mistake, and it was meant to go on his personal Twitter account, but it went on the Stirling University Labour account instead, and that was from an insider, so it's probably true.
Oops, Jimmy.
Stirling University Labour's always been, they were always riven with Young Socialists and anything anyway back in the day, so you only need to look at Stirling SNP to see what, there's certainly reactionary politics is big in Stirling for some reason.
Well, our health secretary, Jean Freeman, she's out of that stable. She was CP at the time. Jack McConnell was Stirling as well, wasn't he?
Aye, there's quite a few, mate. It's been a fair breeding ground for extremists. But what I would say as, I want to caveat by using the word extremist because it's taken on such weird connotations in the last 10 years or so. Extremists back then were just very, very passionate. You know what I mean? They didn't necessarily advocate the kind of things that extremism is now.
They weren't as extreme as our present cabinet, shall we say?
they weren't as extreme as half the cabinet in the SNP as well, mate.
I'd also note there was a bit popped into my timeline from the Herald that apparently Ian Murray's been reported to the party.
Yes, there is. Well, there's a very specific clause within the party that says you can't promote another party, and the picture of him preparing his resignation speech surrounded by his friends is pretty much promoting another party at that point. So I think this is more, when you say there's infighting in the Scottish Labour Party, mate, I think the complaint there is just that wee bit of infighting. And let's be honest, it's not even cats in a bag, it's gerbils in a poly bag. And it's really, it's pretty poor when it comes to infighting. Scottish Labour, like most things, are kind of vanilla and everything these days.
I like the gerbils in a poly bag. I can imagine they wouldn't last long, would they? Because they'd
No, but I don't know.
asphyxiated.
Depends how sick you are, mate. I'd make it one of these thick poly bags and just watch them expire, but then I didn't like gerbils, so.
Well, it looks like the shots, maybe shots fired is not quite where we are. Maybe just loading the guns.
Some days away doing to the shop for the Scottish Bluebell because they didn't trust the Swan Vestas.
Aye, I think so. Last night's Newsnight was interesting.
Yeah.
Stuart, we'll give you first bite of the cherry on this one, I think.
It was essentially a piece, obviously inspired by the inclusion in Nicola Sturgeon's programme for government. And starting the gun, you could say, for another Indyref. So they put together a package. Phillipa Whiteford was always good value on. Jamie Green, Tory. But what was I'd handle the meat of it, but at the start of it, they had Professor Curtice on, the polling expert. And what I found fascinating by his contribution was that he said that if it got the question of a Section 30 order to go ahead with an Indyref the same as 2014, he thought there was a chance that the Supreme Court would allow it.
Was it as strong as that?
I think that's the word he used.
Right. Yeah. It's the good Tories, if there is such a thing. The Tories who still have some sort of moral backbone seem to be coming out with if there's a majority for the SNP and it's in the manifesto, blah, 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 it would be very difficult for Westminster to ignore it. I think that's not true. I think this cabinet, Boris and Cummings, will just say no. So there has to be some other way of leveraging it.
I think you're probably right. I think Boris is wedded to saying no, but then he's been wedded to quite a few things before that he's burrowed on the head of a sixpence when push has come to shove. But I found the piece interesting. I don't know who advised Jamie Green to say aye to the piece, but whoever did advise him, probably himself. Probably a very bad idea, bit of way more than he could chew last night, and he was made to look like a complete lightweight. I mean, even at the end, he just wouldn't answer the Newsnight presenters' questions. He just blurted out the same tired old lines that Scottish Tories blurt out when there's no answer that they've got to give.
No, I mean, the thing was, of course, what he was saying, the Scottish Tory line, is a complete contradiction to what the reason that the piece was being shown on Newsnight at all, because it was a response basically to the James Forsyth Spectator article, which is suggesting that the Tories might allow a referendum as long as it's on their terms.
I mean, that was the thing. The Newsnight presenter actually said that to him, gave him the opening, and he clearly either hadn't seen that article or it was way over his head, and he had no idea what was being talked about. So he actually made himself look even more stupid than he usually does in Holyrood. So congratulations, Jamie Green. Well,
I now understand why he's grown a beard, because he looks about 12 if you take the beard away.
I think he's been looking across the chamber at Ross Greer and thinking, Ken, what? Ginger beards are almost acceptable these days.
What I've found notable, sort of spread across yesterday in today's papers, is the suggestion from the Unionists. John O'Toole tweeted about it and took me to it. The idea of having an agreement on independence before a Section 30 is granted by Westminster. And as I tweeted to John O'Toole, what you want here is an agreement to everything Westminster wants. And if we don't give them that, they won't give us a referendum. That's not a negotiation. That's blackmail.
Aye, Bill, you're not allowed to use that word when you're talking about a Westminster government, surely they wouldn't stoop to blackmail, Norman.
Well, the same John O'Toole used Brexit as, you know, the reason we should do this, because Brexit has been such a fuck up.
Mm.
You know.
Well, that has been the case. That was the argument, of course, that especially by leavers, was unionist leavers in England, that they won the Brexit argument because they weren't forced to put any meat on the bones of what Brexit would look.
Well, I kind of think about it, guys. What do we have to negotiate? If we split with the UK and rejoin the EU, whatever the trade agreement is with the EU is the trade agreement we have with the rest of the UK.
You've got to throw in the Irish history situation.
Well, that's already answered as well. We go for the deal that Southern Ireland has with the UK at the moment.
Yeah.
You know,
and even,
solutions are already out there.
That also applies. Should we not immediately join the EU? Should we say, you know what, let's join the EFTA and sit in EFTA for 2 or 3 years till we work out exactly where we want to be? We would still get that same deal.
Well, that's going to be the big, which I suppose we can kind of move on to George Kerevan at this point.
Can I just throw in Peter Bell before we leave this? Peter Bell idea of going for a dissolve the union referendum rather, well, even if it's not a referendum, keeping it simple rather than having to come up with a menu of details what an independent Scotland could look like would be possibly a solution.
Well, the simple solution is simply to say, right, on September the 1st, we're independent and we'll start negotiating whatever we need to negotiate at that point.
Well, they did it with what they call the velvet divorce, I think, Slovakia and the Czech Republic. They kind of did it that way. I
mean, I kind of think that, I mean, one of the things Westminster, I would imagine, will attempt to do, if we get to that 60% for independence point, Westminster will enact a law that says we cannot do trade deals until we're independent, just like the EU rules, because that stymies you. If they don't do that, you can have the EFTA ready to go.
If they want to do
on day one,
stuff, if they do anything that is designed specifically to stymie us, they're adding 5% a month to independence vote rather than 1%.
I think it's, sorry, no.
Well, I mean, my kind of view of it is that they will. I mean, it's why they want anybody with Scottish blood anywhere in the world to have a vote. It's why they want an agreement before the vote. Because if they don't get the agreement they won't allow the vote.
I think all these things are just coming up because they're panicking.
Yeah. I think it's worth pointing out something else from last night's Newsnight programme, which hasn't been mentioned yet. Phillipa Whiteford was asked, what's the plan B? What is the strategy if you get refused a Section 30? And she said, it's above my pay scale. She didn't deny there was one.
I'm sorry, I mean, all the evidence suggests there isn't a plan B. But I still, in the back of my head, I think there is something there. I don't know what it is. I have no idea.
I just thought she was good. Her response was good.
Because when you think about it, Stuart, there's nothing above Phillipa Whiteford's pay grade. Well, maybe there is stuff above her pay grade in terms of what she's let into by the SNP hierarchy, but there's nothing above her mind. She's got a fabulous brain, and I'm pretty sure she's not just got a plan B, she's got C, D, and E ready to go if necessary.
Yeah. And as I say, this renegotiation I find interesting because it's just a different version of we want to renegotiate the Treaty of Union.
Which would absolutely suit me down to the ground.
Well, talking about unions, have you noticed that the Unionists have started talking about the Union of the United Kingdom? This is a new phrase they're using. The Prime Minister used it on TV today. They're calling it the Union of the United Kingdom.
Is this like the blackness of the black cat?
Yeah, there you go. There's no such thing as a Union of the United Kingdom, but they've
decided.
decided.
Talking about Unionists, apparently Effie Deans couldn't find Fort William.
Aye, I think that's just a glorious vision. Aye, complaining about signs in 2 languages, and they were confusing her. For anybody that does, well, everybody must know. There's one road in and one road out to Fort William. You can't bloody miss it. A big, huge mountain hanging about over Britain's biggest mountain, hanging about over the side of it that you can see for 15, 20 miles away, easy from the roadside.
Maybe she didn't know that. But the question I've got is, does Fort William on a sign look different if there's a Gaelic phrase below it or above it?
No,
oddly, mate, it looks very, very similar.
No, I think there is a dispute, of course, about changing the name, but it wouldn't be just to change the name to a Gaelic version of Fort William. It would be going back to the original name.
Yeah, but do the signs not have both English and Gaelic?
Yes.
But they aren't. But there is a discussion going on about giving up the name Fort William and going back to the original, because Fort William was an imposed name from Britain.
Well, yeah, it would be during the clearances. Well, not the clearances, during the 45, I would imagine.
Yeah, the place had a name. I can't remember what it was, but they had a name before.
Okay.
Talking about names, right? Before you go, Fort Britannia. Somebody's come up with a name for Queen Elizabeth's house. The UK government's 3,000 civil servant block in the middle of Edinburgh. Why don't we call it Fort Britannia?
No.
Okay.
Can we call it Queen Elizabeth VII house?
Whatever you like.
I quite like the idea of Queen Elizabeth I house, just to rub their noses in it. But
okay, let's move on to George Kerevan.
Yeah.
Stuart, you wanted to pop at this.
Well, he's not being very controversial for a change, which, there you go. George Kerevan questions on the Scottish Government Programme for Government. Cool. The subheadline's better. SNP Programme for Government, handing the Scottish economy over to foreign capital. He's not very happy as part of the Programme for Government. It seems he sees it as perhaps too more like the Irish model, where everything it goes in. I'm not going to go into the detail, but where of course the suggestion is inward investment is going to be very good and very important for a brand new independent Scotland. But he just seems to think that the Programme for Government looks too strong on that, especially as you get something like, he mentions Baillie Gifford. I'm not exactly, they're a financial institution in Scotland. They've got 20 billion in funds. In fact, they're the biggest investor in Tesla.
Electric car manufacturer.
They make cars, but they make their money on the batteries.
Yeah. I'm not sure about this. I mean, I think all three of us would agree that we'd like to see power, electricity, etc., nationalised, oil nationalised, wind nationalised, water, which is, but continue to be nationalised, possibly the heavy duty transport, i.e. trains, maybe even buses. That might be the way to cure the more remote areas having bus services. I mean, all that I think's up for grabs and discussion in an independent Scotland.
I think you've got to consider. Sorry, Jimmy.
I'd agree with that, but I thought George jumped to quite a few conclusions to get to a point that he never quite made. None of us are sure what will happen in a newly independent Scotland. There's plenty of alternatives out there. But that list that Norrie just gave there, all that stuff, it's not just up for grabs. I mean, Edinburgh has a fabulous bus service that the rest of the country envies. Why not try and find a way to roll that out throughout the whole of Scotland? And Edinburgh City Council is the majority shareholder, but you wouldn't really call it a council bus service. You know what I mean? It's taking the expertise that we have in public transport in Edinburgh and rolling it around, and that might mean that people like Anne Glogan, Brian Souter, who've had undue influence over the SNP because they were major funders for years. They might not like that, but end of the day, I want the country to be run for the good of all, not for whoever's got the biggest checkbook.
It's bringing up the Edinburgh bus service is quite interesting because it's now into East Lothian, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean,
they manage East Lothian as well.
East Lothian, West Lothian, and the borders.
Aye, it's a. I mean, you just have to look. Not even you mentioned trains. Look at the difference just reopening the Borders Railway has made, and the excitement that created in the Borders, and the excitement that's now created by the fact that they're looking to push its route to Carlisle. There's fabulous.
Yeah.
Wherever the investment comes from, there are some wonderful, massive infrastructure things to be done over the next 20, 30 years in Scotland. You get that daft Tory yesterday saying put an extra lane on the M8. Finish dueling the A9 and let's open up the islands a wee bit. Let's finally do something about the rest and be thankful.
I saw Ruth Wishart tweeting today about that, about HS2 and the amount of money going in. And her point was, you know, if more people are going to be working from home, we might have the infrastructure we need already in place. I mean, if you lose 20% of people off the railways in the south of England, is that enough to make it a comfortable, viable, sensible railway?
You mean because of
need to be overcrowded to make money?
Exactly.
What? Because of the virus, you mean, and homework?
Aye, because you're probably right. We probably do have the infrastructure in the central belt, for example, that we'll need if you lose 20% with people working from home and what have you. It's probably because, let's be clear, the M8 is brilliant. The M8 is a fabulous road, other than at certain times of day. And if those times of day are going to, if there's going to be less traffic at those times of day, then stick with that cracking road we've got. And let's, as I say, let's finish the A9. Let's upgrade the A90. Let's open up our country.
And I would. I mean, I live in Leith. T-shirt. But have lived in the country in my time. And I do think it's important that the Scottish Government plans for better infrastructure for outlying districts.
I'd agree with you, because
I'm not sure how you do it. Various things have been tried, but
I think it's maybe just because we're optimists and we think that independence would work. But I expect an independent Scotland to happen. And when it does, regardless of teething problems and what have you, I expect there to be not just inward investment, but I expect people to come home. I think there's loads of people that would love to come back to an independent Scotland and live in their native villages in the Highlands or in the Borders and that, if there was work for them to do, and if there was the opportunity, if need be, for them to commute to, say, an Edinburgh or a Glasgow, to work for 3 days there and then live the life of Riley and Stow or wherever for the next 4. Why not?
It's true. I mean, it was interesting. One of the other topics we might have discussed today was apparently there has been, according to Ben McPherson, who's our local MSP, is he not here? North Edinburgh. There's a report out that says inward investment from the rest of the UK. By that they mean the majority, obviously, English migrants is still to increase.
What was that? I saw some figures maybe from the same thing. 400,000 people in Scotland are non-UK residents.
Non-UK? No, this report is suggesting they're coming from other UK.
Migrants.
Oh, right. Sorry, it was maybe part of the same report then.
Well, you see that just on any indie page. If you're running through it, there's always comments for people in Liverpool, Manchester, all over the country saying, "Go for it. I'd love to live up there."
Mm.
And then you've got to look at the Irish situation. Look what happens when the Irish in modern history in the last 20 years, when Ireland started, the Irish economy started improving, say around the time of the year 2000, the population grew with Irish people coming home.
Yeah, and hopefully
Aye.
that'll happen. Well, I mean, we've kind of touched on the future indie thing.
Aye. We've also,
Jimmy.
I was just going to say, we've also touched on the Irish situation. It's a nice segue into that Sky piece, because there was a few interesting points in there, was there not?
Aye. I was particularly interested in the comment from the presenter about the English taxpayer paying for furlough.
Aye, that was
which
a
is
particularly nice one, wasn't it?
Well, it's great news because that means it doesn't get lumped onto our deficit.
Oh no, but that'll mean we won't have to pay so much tax if the English are going to pay for it.
I was looking at that. I was looking at that thinking, what am I going to spend my dividend on this year? My union dividend that the English taxpayer sends to us.
Oh, the £2,000.
I want a new van. That's what I'm after. I've already got it in mind.
But this guy is on national TV, on Sky, Sam Coates, claiming that nobody in Scotland is going to put any money into the furlough.
No, we didn't pay tax. We didn't pay tax up here, mate. We just sit with our hands out and wait for the English taxpayer to
tin cup. We've got a tin cup and we sit on the pavement.
Unbelievable.
I mean, well, it's not just him though, mate. You had Alistair Jack saying how easy it was for the SNP to deal with furlough and that because Scotland's not writing the cheques. Who's writing the cheques? You write this wonderful UK Treasury? Are we meant to believe that Rishi Sunak just walks in there and just presses a few buttons and suddenly all the gold bars start popping out? Right, we'll send that many to Scotland, that many to Wales, that many to Ireland, and we can hang on to a few for England and all.
Jimmy, that's not far off what happens. He tells the Bank England to press a few buttons. They generate money, electronic money, and then he decides where to apportion it.
No. Apparently, Scotland generates 60% of the deficit.
Well, you see, I can believe that because, I mean, why work for the money if you can just get it off the English?
We don't work in Scotland at all. We don't make it.
And they've got the cheek to call us stupid when we've been taking money out their pockets and they never even noticed.
Okay, but I'll tell you what, though. The stupidest comment, and there were a few stupid comments in the piece, but when they went to Northern Ireland and they spoke to a mother and daughter, and the mother was asked what the union meant to her, and she said stability. I'm looking at thinking, what, did you just sleep through the entire 70s, 80s, 90s, doll? Did you sleep through the whole of the Troubles?
I know, and it was interesting too, actually, that Sam Coates, let's be honest, this is a short piece on Sky. You can watch it repeated all day today, apparently. And we decided before we come on air, it was effectively just a short piece of headlines. So you don't get much meat in it. But the one headline I remember from it was Sam Coates claimed that Scotland wasn't going to be the first one to go independent. It would be Northern Ireland, that it was much closer to reunification than Scotland wanted getting it independent.
He kind of suggested that England had conferred, through the Good Friday Agreement, England had conferred a constitutional right upon Northern Ireland that it was going to withhold from Scotland. And they can't confer any constitutional rights. There is no constitution for the United Kingdom. So how can they confer any constitutional rights upon anyone?
It's one of the most interesting things about the Constitution. The fact it doesn't exist. The fact it's so malleable it can change at the drop of a hat. A decision by a judge, not Parliament, a decision in the law courts can change our Constitution, and does on a regular basis.
Yeah, but the key thing is one Parliament can't hold the next Parliament to follow with any acts that they, if you pass an act now, this Parliament, once Boris is gone, the next Parliament can reverse it completely.
Yeah.
That's stability, by the way.
Yes. Business for Scotland. Jimmy, you had a look at them. What are they saying today?
Oh, it's just there's a lot of interesting discussion going on in that Believe in Scotland group set up by Gordon McIntyre Kemp, who's the man behind Business for Scotland. And a lot of people there, they're probably more optimistic than we are, but they're now looking at the future shape of an indie Scotland. There's discussions going on about, right, we've voted for independence. what do we do? Do we have, say, the SNP who have taken us to independence? Do they have a 2-year term whilst we, you know, have a constitutional convention, work out if we're going to have things like a second chamber, which I didn't think we need, but exactly how we're going to operate as an independent country. And then, because in that first couple of years, I think there'd be some serious upheaval with the parties that are against independence. You're going to see parties splitting apart and alliances forming. So do we then have an election to see where these alliances want to take us? Because the future of the left in Scotland, the future of the right in Scotland, everything would change after independence. And it's just an interesting talking shop to see where you think Scotland might end up as we become an independent country.
I hope when we win the independence vote, the first thing that's done is that we create a government of national unity to make these decisions. I really hope that the SNP, who I think would win the next election hands down anyway, I hope that they have the big enough hearts to say to everybody, right guys, let's all sit down and decide things like constitutional things like a second house, the shape of that chamber. I mean, I think a second house is a good idea. And I think a powerful second house with a powerful voice is a good idea. How you make it non-political, because politicians want it to be voted in, and I don't think it should be, because it becomes party political at that point. It should be a house of experts as far as possible.
No, you're going down the road of an excuse for the House of Lords, aren't you?
No, I don't think the House of Lords is supposed to be a house of experts. It's a political game, the House of Lords. And I'd like to think we'd think about not allowing it to be a political game, the second house. Second chamber, as far as possible in Scotland, I would like to see non-political, non-party political.
I'm not so sure we need one. I quite like the fact that, or the thought that Holyrood, as elected at the moment, is very proportional. And I think as well, because you've got these list MSPs, you get, or in an independent Scotland, because it would be very different, you would get regional groups forming within the list MSPs. You know, the Highland MSPs, for example, might come together a hell of a lot better than they would right now, because the list MSPs, it's purely politics. You know, Labour, when they sit down with Tories and discuss things that are best for the Highlands, because they'd rather argue with them about national politics.
Yeah, but I do think we would inherit a problem that's already a problem for the UK. I mean, we would inherit the Central Belt, which is a southeast problem, but in a Scottish context.
Yeah, but
exactly.
But you can refer back to something we were talking about 5 minutes ago, which is the model for Scotland more things. Now, for example, one of the reasons for doing that is the rural areas, the Highlands, how private don't work with a lot of population.
Yeah, and we need to look at what other countries do about that. How do you balance that? The islands, the Highlands, the big spaces with sparse populations. How do you maintain their standards compared to the Central Belt, where the money is, and that makes it easier?
As I say, that's where I think that you would get the groups forming that at the moment just can't. You know, I think there are 9 list MSPs from the Highland region, but they all just fall into part of political arguments to argue about stuff. They want to sit down together and discuss what's best for the Highlands. You've also, when you talk about a second chamber, we've got some pretty big local authorities that maybe power should be devolved down that way a bit, rather than having a second chamber.
Well, I was just about to bring that up myself, Jimmy. I think perhaps I'm neither here nor there on the second chamber. I haven't made up my mind, but I am not happy about the local authorities structure that we were, it was Thatcher that forced this structure on us.
Mm.
I quite like that idea, Jimmy. A chamber that's created from the tier below government, or maybe
Well, I think
even below that.
aye, because again, there's some expertise there, mate, and not just in administration, which some of them are clearly very good at, but like we were talking earlier about Lothian buses, the guys, there are now probably, I don't know, there's probably half a dozen Edinburgh councillors that have served on the board of Lothian buses at various points. Take them into the second chamber and say what worked, what doesn't, how do we go about expanding this nationwide?
I do feel that we should work hard at taking party politics out of a second chamber if it's going to exist, because you need that. You need to be able to burst the bubble of dogma.
I'd agree with you as well, because some of these huge projects that we're going to look at, like levelling up the entire country. I hate the term levelling up because Boris has been using it that long, but there has to be more investment into the rural communities, because that's, apart from anything else, that's where people want to go and live. You know, how many Scots do we know that have said to us, aye, when I retire, I'm going to the Borders, or I'm going to the Highlands, or I'm going to the West Coast, or whatever.
Yeah.
They want to go and live there. You want to have opportunities for them to do that. But by doing that, you can't have these people skewing the property market so that young people can't get onto the property ladder that actually live and want to work there.
A very good point, because the land the land laws of Scotland are really appalling.
Well,
Aye, they are. I think that's the biggest one for all of us, eh? Massive reform.
The first thing is just to identify who owns it.
Mm-hmm.
And that way you can then introduce tax and go after them.
Exactly. But we're all agreed on that one then.
Yes.
Aye.
We'll become land revolutionaries after independence, lads.
We'll just Andy Whiteman's battle bus.
Mm-hmm. You're going to have to make up with Andy Whiteman then, Norrie.
Well, I'm probably not going to have to worry about it. Truth told.
Norrie,
okay, guys. Sorry.
I've got a funny for you, mate, because I know you like a wee funny now and again, and it's from a local Leith lassie, I believe, Citizen Pangloss. She is.
All right. Yes, I know her well.
Well, she tweeted an absolute belter this morning. It's kind of along the lines of the Labour infight, and I absolutely adore this one. So it's funny seeing James Kelly MSP described as a stalking horse when he would barely make a decent Clays horse. That's a belter, eh?
She's local. I think she's Leith Walk, Miss Pangloss.
Mm-hmm. Yes, she has been known to describe happenings on Leith Walk.
Yes.
She used to always use Scots, but in more recent years she switches backwards and forwards.
She's good fun. She's very insightful.
Aye.
Oh, aye.
She can pick the nub of the problem out and expose it to the light. Well, I think we'll call it a day at that, guys. Thanks very much. I don't have to edit anything today, which I'm very glad about. Thanks for listening, folks. Stuart Lockhead and Jimmy Hutton. I'm Norrie.
Bye-bye.
Day off tomorrow, but we'll catch you all on Sunday, when no doubt Gordon Brewer will have enlightened us to the world. Cheers for now, folks.